The dust never settled in Millbrook. It hung in the air like the town's unspoken judgments, coating everything in a fine layer of grit that matched the harsh reality of frontier life. In the summer of 1887, when the sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden storefronts and the saloon doors creaked in the dry wind, the town harbored a secret that everyone knew, but nobody dared speak of openly. Martha Whitfield lived in the shadows. She occupied a small room above Henderson's general store, paying her rent by mending clothes and taking in laundry when the other women in town were desperate enough to overlook their disgust. Martha had been born different, cursed, some whispered, with thick dark hair that grew not just on her head, but across her jaw and chin, creating a beard that no amount of prayer or home remedies could remove. "She's got the devil in her," Mrs. Abernathy would mutter to her circle of friends as they gathered on Sunday mornings after church. "Ain't natural for a woman to look like that." The Reverend himself had suggested that Martha's condition was a sign of moral failing, though he'd never been brave enough to say it to her face. Instead, he preached sermons about hidden sins and the importance of cleansing oneself before God, his eyes inevitably finding Martha in the back pew, where she sat alone, her head covered by a worn shawl. Martha had learned to navigate the town like a ghost. She emerged only when necessary, early mornings to collect laundry, late evenings to return the mended clothes. She kept her head down, spoke only when spoken to, and endured the stares and whispers with a dignity that somehow made her tormentors even more uncomfortable. On the outskirts of Millbrook, where the prairie stretched endlessly toward the horizon, lived another outcast entirely. Samuel "Sam" Carson owned a modest ranch that he worked alone, tending to a small herd of cattle and a few horses with the kind of quiet determination that frontier life demanded. At 35, Sam had weathered face lines that spoke of too much sun and too much solitude. His dark hair was streaked with premature grey, and his hands bore the calluses and scars of a man who'd built everything he owned with his own labour. Sam rarely came to town, and when he did, he spoke little. He'd buy his supplies, tip his hat politely to the ladies, and leave without engaging in the social rituals that bound the community together. Some said he was strange. Others claimed he was simply shy. The truth was that Sam Carson had learned long ago that people were capable of great cruelty, and he preferred the honest company of his animals to the complicated politics of human society. But Sam noticed things. He noticed how Martha Whitfield hurried through her errands, with her eyes fixed on the ground. He noticed how conversation stopped when she appeared and resumed in harsh whispers after she passed. He noticed the way children were pulled quickly to their mothers' sides when Martha approached, as if her difference might be contagious. Most of all, Sam noticed that beneath the shawl and the hunched shoulders, Martha Whitfield carried herself with a grace that spoke of inner strength, the kind of strength that comes from enduring daily humiliation and choosing dignity over bitterness. The summer heat had been particularly brutal that year, and tempers in Millbrook ran as hot as the sun overhead. The crops were struggling, water was scarce, and the town's mood had turned increasingly ugly. People needed someone to blame for their hardships, someone to focus their frustration upon. Martha Whitfield, the bearded lady who lived in the shadows, was about to discover that shadows could only protect her for so long. Tuesday morning dawned oppressive and still, without even a hint of wind to stir the dust that lay thick on Main Street. The thermometer outside Henderson's general store already read 90 degrees by 9 o'clock, and the day promised to be another scorcher. Martha had risen early, as was her custom, to avoid the bustling morning crowd. She needed to collect Mrs. Peterson's washing and hoped to complete her errands before the town fully awakened. But as she descended the narrow stairs from her room, she could hear voices from the store below, more voices than usual for such an early hour. "I'm telling you, it ain't natural," came the sharp voice of Mrs. Abernathy. "My chickens stopped laying the day after she walked past my yard. Ain't no coincidence. And little Tommy's been having nightmares. added Mrs. Henderson, the storekeeper's wife. Says he's seen her face in his dreams, all covered in that hair. Martha froze on the bottom step, her heart pounding. She'd heard whispers before, but never such open conversation about her supposed malevolent influence on the town. Maybe it's time someone did something about it, suggested a third voice, Mr. Patterson, who owned the feed store. This heat's got everyone on edge, and having her around ain't helping nobody feel right about things. What are you suggesting, Edgar? Mrs. Henderson asked, though her tone suggested she might not disapprove of whatever he had in mind. I'm saying maybe she ought to know what decent folks think about her kind living among Christian people. Martha's hands trembled as she gripped the wooden railing. She could slip back upstairs and wait for them to leave, but she had obligations to fulfill. Mrs. Peterson's laundry needed to be returned, and Martha couldn't afford to lose what little income she had. Taking a deep breath, she pulled her shawl more tightly around her face and stepped into the store. The conversation stopped abruptly. 3 pairs of eyes fixed on her with expressions ranging from disgust to outright hostility. Martha kept her gaze lowered and moved quickly toward the back of the store, where the clean clothes waited in a neat bundle. "Well, look what the devil dragged in," Patterson muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Martha's fingers fumbled with the knot securing the laundry bundle. She could feel their stares boring into her, could sense their disgust radiating like heat from a forge. "Edgar," Mrs. Henderson warned softly, but her husband had emerged from behind the counter. "You got some nerve showing your face around decent people," Henderson said, his voice growing bolder. "Scaring children, cursing livestock. Maybe it's time you found somewhere else to peddle your misfortune." Martha finally managed to untie the bundle and lifted it into her arms. "I've done nothing wrong," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "I pay my rent on time and keep to myself." "Udi, keeping to yourself ain't enough when your very presence is an affront to God and nature." Patterson stepped closer, emboldened by Henderson's support. "Maybe you need to learn your place." As Martha hurried toward the door, Patterson's hand shot out and knocked the laundry from her arms, sending clean clothes scattering across the dusty floor. "Oops," he said with mock innocence. "Clumsy of me." Martha knelt to gather the scattered garments, her face burning with shame and anger. As she worked, more people began to gather in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. Word spread quickly in a small town, and by the time Martha had collected the soiled laundry, a small crowd had assembled. "Look at her," someone called out, "crawling around on her hands and knees like an animal." That's where she belongs," added another voice. "Should have stayed hidden like the freak she is." Martha stood slowly, clutching the dirty laundry to her chest. The crowd had grown larger, blocking her path to the door. Faces that had once merely avoided her now showed open contempt and barely contained violence. "Let me pass," Martha said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Let you pass." Patterson laughed harshly. "I think it's time this town had a proper discussion about your future here." The crowd surged forward, and Martha found herself being pushed toward the door, not to freedom, but toward the town square where more people were gathering. The morning heat seemed to intensify with each step, and Martha realized with growing horror that this was no spontaneous outburst of cruelty. This had been planned. In the square, someone had prepared a wooden platform, ostensibly for public announcements, but today it would serve a different purpose. Rough hands pushed Martha up onto the platform, and she found herself standing above a sea of hostile faces. Men, women, even children had come to witness whatever judgment the town had decided to pass. "Citizens of Millbrook," Patterson called out, assuming the role of spokesman, "we've gathered here today to address a problem that's been festering in our community too long." A roar of approval rose from the crowd. Martha swayed slightly on the platform, overwhelmed by the heat, the hostility, and the terrible realization that she was completely alone against an entire town's hatred. "This creature," Patterson continued, pointing an accusing finger at Martha, "has brought nothing but misfortune and unease to our Christian community." Children have nightmares, livestock sickens, crops fail, and still she remains among us, flaunting her ungodly appearance. The first stone was small, barely a pebble really, thrown by a child too young to understand the full weight of his action. It struck Martha's shoulder and she stumbled slightly. The second stone was larger, thrown by an adult hand with deliberate force. It caught her in the chest and she gasped, dropping the bundle of laundry. "Stone the witch!" someone shouted from the back of the crowd, and the chant was quickly taken up by others. "Stone the witch! Stone the witch!" More stones flew through the air. Martha raised her arms to protect her face, but there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The platform that elevated her above the crowd also made her an easy target for their hatred. A sharp stone caught her above the left eye, and she felt warm blood begin to trickle down her cheek. Through the pain and terror, Martha caught sight of a familiar figure at the edge of the crowd, Sam Carson sitting astride his horse, his weathered face set in grim lines as he watched the spectacle unfold. Their eyes met for a moment, and Martha saw something in his expression that she couldn't quite identify. Then another stone struck her, and she turned away, certain that even this lone witness to her humiliation would do nothing to help her. The stones continued to fly, and Martha began to pray, not for rescue, for she expected none, but for the strength to endure whatever came next, with what remained of her dignity intact. The stones kept coming, each one carrying the weight of years of accumulated prejudice and fear. Martha's shawl had been torn away, exposing her bearded face to the harsh sunlight and even harsher judgment of the crowd. Blood from multiple cuts mixed with sweat and tears, and still she stood, refusing to fall, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her completely broken. "Please," she whispered, though her voice was lost in the roar of the mob. "Please, I've done nothing wrong." But mercy was not what the crowd had come for. They had come for a purging, a cleansing of what they saw as a stain on their community. The heat seemed to feed their fury, and the stones grew larger, thrown with increasing force and accuracy. Mrs. Abernathy, her face twisted with righteous indignation, had bent to pick up another rock when a voice cut through the chaos like a blade through fabric. "Enough!" The single word, spoken with quiet authority, somehow carried over the shouting and stone-throwing. Heads turned toward the source of the voice, and gradually the crowd began to quiet as they recognized the speaker. Sam Carson had dismounted from his horse and was walking slowly toward the platform. His spurs clinked softly against the hard-packed earth with each deliberate step. He wasn't hurrying, wasn't shouting, but something in his bearing commanded attention. The crowd parted before him like wheat before a scythe. "Sam Carson," Patterson called out, trying to regain control of the situation. "Good to see you in town. Come to witness justice being served." Sam didn't answer immediately. He continued his measured approach to the platform, his pale blue eyes never leaving Martha's bloodied face. When he reached the wooden structure, he placed one booted foot on the first step. "Justice?" Sam's voice was soft, but it carried clearly in the suddenly still air. "Is that what you call this, Edgar?" "She's a curse on this town, Sam," Mrs. Abernathy interjected. "Everyone knows it. The children are frightened, the animals are spooked. She ain't natural." Sam had climbed onto the platform now and stood beside Martha. Up close, he could see the extent of her injuries. Cuts on her face and arms, a swelling bruise above her left eye, blood seeping through her torn dress. But what struck him most was that she was still standing, still holding her head up despite everything they had done to her. "Look at her, Sam," Henderson called from the crowd. "Look at that face and tell me she belongs among decent Christian folk." Sam did look at Martha then, really looked at her. He saw the beard that had made her a target of hatred, yes, but he also saw intelligent brown eyes filled with pain, but not defeat. He saw a woman who had endured more cruelty in one morning than most people faced in a lifetime, and who still refused to beg for mercy from those who offered none. "I'm looking," Sam said quietly. Then louder, addressing the entire crowd. "I'm looking at a woman who's done nothing to deserve this treatment." A murmur of disagreement rippled through the crowd, but Sam held up a hand for silence. "You want to talk about what's natural?" Sam's voice grew stronger, more forceful. "I'll tell you what ain't natural. It ain't natural for a whole town to turn against one woman just because she looks different. It ain't natural for grown men and women to throw stones at someone who's never lifted a hand against any of you." "Sam," Patterson warned, "you don't know what you're talking about. She's cursed, everyone can see that." "The only curse I see here is the ugliness in your hearts," Sam replied sharply. "You talk about being Christian folk? Show me where in your Bible it says to stone a woman for the crime of being different." Martha stared at Sam in amazement. No one had ever defended her before, certainly not publicly, and against such overwhelming opposition. She wanted to tell him to stop, to save himself from the town's wrath, but the words wouldn't come. "She's got you fooled too, Sam," Mrs. Abernathy said. "Can't you see what she is?" Sam stepped closer to Martha, and for a moment the crowd held its breath, waiting to see what he would do. Martha's heart pounded as she felt his presence beside her, solid and reassuring after so much hostility. "I see exactly what she is," Sam said, his voice carrying clearly across the square. He reached out and took Martha's bloodied hand in his work-roughened one. "She's the woman I'm going to marry." The words hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Conversations erupted immediately, voices raised in shock and disbelief. Someone shouted, "You can't be serious!" While another voice called out, "Have you lost your mind?" But Sam wasn't finished. Still holding Martha's hand, he turned to face the crowd fully. "Martha Whitfield," he said, his voice formal and clear, "will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Martha's legs nearly gave out beneath her. She stared at Sam's weathered face, searching for some sign that this was a cruel joke or a moment of temporary madness. But his eyes were steady and serious, and his hand holding hers was gentle but firm. I don't understand," she whispered. "It's simple," Sam said, though his voice was kind. "A man needs a wife, and you need someone to stand beside you. Seems to me we might be able to help each other." The crowd had fallen into stunned silence. Even Patterson seemed at a loss for words. The idea that someone would voluntarily marry the woman they'd just been stoning was beyond their comprehension. "What do you say, Martha?" Sam asked gently. Martha looked out at the crowd of faces that had shown her nothing but hatred and cruelty, then back at this unexpected man who was offering her not just rescue, but partnership. She had spent her entire life alone, convinced that her appearance made her unworthy of love, or even basic human kindness. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you." Sam squeezed her hand and turned back to the crowd. "You heard her. Martha Whitfield is going to be Martha Carson, which makes her my responsibility and under my protection. Anyone who has a problem with my wife will have to take it up with me." The implication was clear. Sam Carson might be quiet and solitary, but everyone knew he was also tough as rawhide and handy with both fists and firearms. The crowd began to disperse, muttering among themselves, their bloodlust cooled by this unexpected turn of events. As the square emptied, Sam helped Martha down from the platform. Her legs were shaky, and she was still bleeding from several cuts, but she was no longer alone. "Why?" she asked as they walked toward his horse. "Why would you do this?" Sam was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "Maybe because someone should have done it a long time ago," he said finally, "and maybe because I've been alone too long to let a good woman face the world by herself." As they rode out of Millbrook together, Martha clinging to Sam's broad back, neither of them looked back at the town square where so much hatred had been on display. They had each other now, and that was something entirely new for both of them. The Carson Ranch lay 15 miles outside of Millbrook, connected to the town by a dusty trail that wound through low hills covered in prairie grass and scattered juniper trees. As Sam's horse carried them away from the hatred of the town square, Martha felt as though she was traveling not just through space, but through time. leaving behind the life of shadows and isolation she had always known for something utterly unknown. The ranch house was modest, but well-maintained, built of weathered wood and native stone, with a wide front porch that looked out over rolling pastureland. A barn and several outbuildings spoke of a working operation, though everything showed signs of being maintained by one man's labor alone. Sam helped Martha down from the horse and led her to the porch, where he gestured for her to sit in one of two wooden chairs that looked handmade. "Wait here," he said simply, then disappeared into the house. Martha sat carefully, her body aching from the stones and her mind reeling from the day's events. The quiet of the ranch was almost overwhelming after the chaos of the morning. No shouting voices, no sounds of hostility, just the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the grass. Sam emerged with a basin of water, clean cloths, and a small bottle of whiskey. Without speaking, he set up a makeshift first aid station on the porch and began gently cleaning the cuts on Martha's face and arms. His hands were surprisingly gentle for their size and roughness. "This'll sting a bit," he warned, before dabbing whiskey on a particularly deep cut above her eyebrow. Martha winced but didn't pull away. "I'm used to pain," she said quietly. Sam paused in his ministrations and looked at her directly. "Well, you won't have to get used to that kind of pain anymore. Not while you're here." When he had finished tending her wounds, Sam sat back in the other chair and studied Martha's face in the afternoon sunlight. She braced herself for the look of revulsion she had seen so many times before, but it didn't come. Instead, Sam's expression was thoughtful, almost curious. "I need to ask you something straight," he said finally, "and I need you to answer me honest." Martha tensed. Here it comes, she thought. The regret, the realization of what he's gotten himself into. "Are you willing to work?" Sam asked. "Ranch life ain't easy, especially for a woman alone out here. I can't promise you comfort or ease, but I can promise you respect and a fair share of whatever we build together." The question was so far from what Martha had expected that she almost laughed. "Work?" she repeated. "Mr. Carson, I've been working since I was old enough to hold a needle. I can cook, clean, mend, tend animals, manage a garden. Anything that needs doing." "Sam," he corrected gently. "If we're to be married, you might as well call me Sam." "Sam," Martha repeated, testing the name. It felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way she'd never experienced. Over the following days, they fell into an unexpected rhythm. Sam was a man of few words, but clear intentions, and he set about making practical arrangements for their life together with the same methodical approach he brought to ranch work. He rode to town to speak with the preacher, a conversation that Martha later learned involved several pointed comments about Christian charity and the difference between faith and prejudice. Meanwhile, Martha explored her new home and began to understand the scope of what Sam was offering her. The ranch was small but profitable, with good water rights and enough grazing land to support a modest herd. More importantly, it was isolated enough that she could live without constantly hiding from suspicious stares. Their wedding took place on a Saturday morning in Sam's front parlor, with only the reluctant preacher and his wife as witnesses. Martha wore a simple blue dress that Sam had purchased for her on one of his trips to town, the first new dress she'd owned in years. The preacher's wife had stared openly at Martha's bearded face during the brief ceremony, but the woman had kept her opinions to herself under Sam's steady gaze. "Do you, Samuel Carson, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Martha Whitfield, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." The words came out stronger than Martha had expected. When Sam placed a simple gold band on her finger, his mother's ring, he told her later, Martha felt something she had never experienced before, a sense of belonging. The first weeks of their marriage were a careful dance of adjustment. Sam moved his belongings from the main bedroom to a smaller room at the back of the house, giving Martha privacy while they learned to live together. They worked side by side during the day, Martha proving surprisingly capable with the horses and cattle, and shared quiet meals in the evening. Gradually, they began to talk. Sam told her about his childhood on a failed farm in Kansas, about the death of his parents from fever, about his decision to head west and build something of his own. Martha shared carefully chosen pieces of her own story, the way her condition had manifested as she grew older, the increasing isolation, the daily humiliations that had become her normal existence. "Did you ever think about leaving Millbrook?" Sam asked one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the hills red and gold. "Every day," Martha admitted. "But I had nowhere to go and no money to get there. And I guess I thought maybe I deserved what I was getting." Sam was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with suppressed anger. Nobody deserves to be treated like that. Nobody. The real test came when they had to return to town for supplies. Martha had dreaded this moment, knowing that their marriage hadn't changed how the townspeople saw her. If anything, it might have made things worse by association. Sam loaded his rifle before they left the ranch, and Martha noticed he kept it within easy reach as they rode into Millbrook. But when they stopped at Henderson's general store, Sam made a point of helping Martha down from the wagon in full view of anyone who cared to watch. He offered her his arm as they walked into the store, and when Henderson himself seemed inclined to make trouble, Sam simply placed his order in a voice that brooked no argument. 50 pounds of flour, 20 pounds of sugar, coffee beans, salt pork, and whatever fabric my wife needs for a new dress. The emphasis on "my wife" was unmistakable. Martha felt a strange pride hearing those words, even from someone who had married her primarily out of kindness rather than love. As autumn turned toward winter, Martha began to realize that something deeper was growing between them. Sam's initial gallantry had given way to genuine partnership, and she found herself looking forward to their evening conversations, to the way he asked her opinion about ranch decisions, to the rare moments when she could make him laugh. One particularly cold evening, as they sat by the fire after a difficult day bringing the cattle closer to the ranch buildings, Martha found the courage to ask the question that had been haunting her. "Sam," she said quietly, "do you ever regret what you did? Marrying me, I mean." Sam looked up from the harness he was mending and studied her face in the firelight. She had grown more comfortable around him and no longer tried to hide her bearded features, though she still felt self-conscious about them. "Do you know what I regret?" Sam asked finally. "I regret that it took me so long to speak up. I regret that you had to suffer alone for so many years before someone had the decency to stand beside you." Martha felt tears prick her eyes, not tears of sadness, but something else entirely. "I never expected to be happy," she said. "I never thought I deserved it." "Well, you do," Sam said firmly. "And if happiness is something we can build together, then I'd say we're off to a good start." Outside, snow began to fall softly, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Inside, by the warmth of their fire, two people who had been outcasts in their different ways continued the slow, careful work of building a life together, a life based not on passion or romance, but on something perhaps more valuable: mutual respect, shared purpose, and the radical act of seeing each other's true worth when the rest of the world had chosen blindness. As winter deepened, so did their partnership, and Martha began to understand that sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about falling in love, but about choosing to love, choosing to stand together against a world that would rather tear you apart.